Welcome to the Nemeth Report podcast. I'm Dr. Tammy Nemeth, energy consultant, historian, and independent researcher, and I'll be your host. Here today to speak with me about Canada's energy transition and sound energy policy from the perspective of engaged Canadian women is Tracey Bodnarchuk. Tracey is the founder and CEO of Canada Powered by Women, an organization created to broaden the conversation around energy transformation, kind of like what I'm trying to do, and to find common ground solutions to shape Canada's future. Hi, Tracey. Welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tammy.
If I can just get you for a brief moment to introduce yourself and ask what led to the creation of Canada Powered by Women and what's its purpose?
Absolutely, I can do that. Yes, my name's Tracey. I'm the CEO of Canada Powered by Women. I'm actually one of eight founders, a group of women that sort of originated out of Calgary and myself at the time in Toronto in 2019. And our purpose at that point was getting women together to have conversations about the economy, the environment, and we just felt, and if you can imagine, back then we thought things were polarized, which is like nothing compared to where it is today. But we wanted to have conversations and discussions about the balance of environment and the economy and energy and just how blessed Canada was to have energy resources. So that's kind of where we started. And we've been hard at it for almost 6 years now. And our whole purpose was to engage women across the country in conversations to really get their perspective on what they want and what they need from energy policy for their daily lives, their daily living, and also just for Canada overall and Canadian citizens and our economy. So our whole point is to have bold conversations, and we do informing, and we go out and we ask women what they think through research. And because the topics are so polarized, even though we're a nonpartisan organization, we rely on data to reflect what women think so that we can take the temperature down and have fact-based conversations with a healthy amount of emotion, as opposed to really emotional conversations where we can just break it down and get more solutions oriented and focus on what we have in common.
Now, I know that you do this polling for quite a long time. I think it's been over the past 3 years. You've done several different polls. Now, would you like to talk a little bit about that now, or should we talk about your recent op-ed in the Calgary Herald?
Well, maybe what I could share, which would be helpful, I think, context for your listeners, is this audience that we refer to as engaged women. It's very important because we do focus on a segment of women in Canada, and that segment actually it's very proportionate to the population where women are in the country. It's somewhat homogenous though, and what I mean by that is traditional demographics that you look at when you do research, things like income, education, where you live, whether or not you have children. That is all pretty consistent for us. So, what really defines our audience is actually more about behavior and curiosity. And what I mean by that is engaged women are like very informed. So, they take in the news, they are interested in politics, they often volunteer, for example, and they really want to say in policy. They recognize that energy and a thriving energy sector is connected to a thriving, prosperous economy. And that connection is quite defining for this audience. So, what's interesting, Tammy, is that we've done research for over 4 or 5 years, but we've been very consistent with our research for the last 3 years. And when we first went out to do our new omnibus research, we wanted to make sure that there was actually an audience. Because, it's like, is anybody having this conversation or is it just us? And what we found when we went out the first time was that there was 24.5% of women in Canada who would be in this like engaged women mix. Then a year later, we went back and we resized again to see where our audience was. And we were kind of surprised, but not, I guess, to see that the audience had grown to 34.5% of women. And that was last February, March. We just did brand new research and sizing, which we're going to talk about. And unbelievably, our audience has grown to 42% of all women in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
crazy. And what defines it, they're like, along with everything I just said, 94% of those women want to ensure that all Canadians have dependable and secure access to energy. They also feel that everyone in the world should have dependable and secure access to energy. And these are 94% and 93%, respectively. That data is 3 weeks old.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's the conversation for sure that's happening.
So did they did you get a sense, do the women feel like that viewpoint is being addressed within the larger political discourse?
I think what we're seeing is that engaged women are very aware and understanding of all the dialogue that's going on right now. And interestingly, we did ask, so I did mention we're nonpartisan, and but we can't help but be very engaged in the news cycle and the political cycles because these topics are of that nature. But in our audience, 48% of our women say that politically they're in the middle. So they're not on the right, they're
Yeah.
not on the left. So they're very balanced in their just origin anyway. But when we did our work this omnibus a couple weeks ago, we did ask women about what their priorities were in upcoming elections, and specifically what kind of policies would influence their voting decisions. And we've seen a massive shift in terms of what the priorities of engaged women have been over the last couple of years and where their policy priorities are right now. There's definitely been a change. I was actually kind of shocked when I saw it.
So tell us what are some of these changes? How has it
Yeah,
shifted from between, say, last year and this year?
yeah. So clearly, affordability prevails. We know that engaged women across the country, are really challenged with affordability for energy. And specifically in Alberta and Newfoundland, they're the two provinces that cite affordable energy as a major concern. Also, they do have the most expensive energy in the country, which might be surprising considering that both are very oil producing provinces or refining province. But we know affordability still prevails. And what we've seen consistently over the last few years is that the number one priority has always been a successful economy, a prosperous economy. So that means jobs and a good, thriving economy. The second priority has always been energy security. So affordable, reliable energy. And then the third priority has been environment, and specifically defined by reducing emissions. And so we've talked a lot about how engaged women are looking for energy policy that really facilitates those priorities. But we do know that their their view was that energy policy was making their lives harder. 43% would say that. And then also that, which is kind of crazy, over 80% fear energy policy that's going to have a financial effect that's negative for them in the future. So that's always been a very consistent view. And when we asked in our omnibus, and this, by the way, was before um, we had all the issues with an Ontario provincial election being called and before Trudeau's resignation, the number one priority for women on policy right now is healthcare.
Wow.
Healthcare. That's followed with the economy. So economy, so when we ask about priorities, that's a little different than asking about what policies are going to influence your voting decisions. But we did see healthcare as the top, and then the economy, and then taxes and housing affordability was number four. And then affordable, reliable energy was number five. So what's interesting is environment is down at number eight, and that is defined as conservation. And then climate change, which would be emissions reduction, is number 10.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I've talked to a lot of colleagues, like we do all of our research with Leger, and recently I was at a speaking engagement with Leger and RBC, because RBC has a really great, Royal Bank of Canada
Yeah.
has a really great research institute. And all of us have seen the environment piece and climate move down. It doesn't mean that it's not important to people, it is. But the way I like to describe it is we have the me and the we. So the me is, you know, my daily life, things that affect me personally. And so the cost of housing, my energy bill, can I get a doctor? Those are things that are like the me, you know? And then when you look at the we, it's like big picture things like energy transformation, as an example. So right now, the me is really overshadowing these big macro perspectives because people are feeling it, women are feeling it, and they're looking for policymakers and decision makers to be way more balanced in their approach and to have energy policy that actually looks at them as individuals and not just like high level thinking and perspectives.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it kind of is reflected in the op-ed that you wrote back in December on the emissions cap, and I wanted to highlight a couple of points from there because you said it so well, where you talked about, how do all of these things, how does that affect our wallets, our affordability, any future prosperity, and that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Environmental responsibility is not mutually exclusive from energy development, and we can do both. And and you highlighted in that article how important it was to take a balanced approach, and clearly the engaged women agree with you that there needs to be this balance and a reordering perhaps of the prioritization in the policy sphere, um, so that what we're doing, if you think it's going to lower emissions, is it actually? All these different things that they're talking about, and how what does that do to how people live their lives? And so there again, it goes to what you saw with this difference between the me and the we. And I wonder if you could maybe just reflect a little bit on that op-ed that you wrote back in December about the emissions cap that I just briefly summarized.
Yeah, well, for sure. Well, here we are. It's February 7th, and that op ed was in December, and a lot's happened since December and today, and with so much more to come. And what I thought was really a good opportunity with the op-ed and discussing the emissions cap particularly was the idea that, what ideas do women have to, get to this balance, and what expectations do they have of policy and also of industry? And it is an expectation that we could have it all. It doesn't have to be an and or, you know, type of scenario. And women, engaged women, really embrace the idea of technology and innovation, and that we should be leading in tech and innovation to lower emissions so that we can continue producing, because they do recognize and understand that the revenues from energy go directly to our safety net. They
Yeah.
fund our healthcare, they fund our education systems and our infrastructure. And also that, uh, they, with an explanation and understanding of what carbon capture storage is, that it's a technology that engaged women support. And
Ah,
so when
yeah.
you look at the emissions cap, and what I put in the op ed was that, is the emission cap actually designed to facilitate emissions reduction with continued production? And knowing that technology like carbon capture storage, and if someone's not familiar with it, my very rudimentary definition of it, which any engineer would probably shudder at, is essentially putting emissions in the ground. So you have carbon capture, you capture, you put it in the ground, you store it. And there are many things underway and lots of products that are developed out of carbon. as a byproduct. And so we need to embrace that, and we need to, continue with the innovation. And that's what engaged women are expecting. They're also expecting industry to do this, with with or without support from government. It is an expectation. You can't produce and not have responsibility for emissions, but there's an allowable perspective around the trade-offs of, having a robust economy, dealing with emissions, but still taking care of things. So I think that this balance piece, I'm hoping with recent events that there's an awakening that's happening, which frankly, it seems from our research that engaged women have had for a long time.
Yeah, when you mentioned that the engaged women are expecting industry to embrace the sort of technological developments and innovation. And what's interesting is sometimes the hydrocarbon industry is portrayed as being fossilized, but it's one of the most innovative industries in the world. All of the developments that have taken place over the century, and I think there's been a lot of research and development with respect to carbon capture and how it's been used in enhanced oil recovery for at least 60 years. So it's not like companies don't know how to do it. The expense is when it gets stored underground and no longer is useful, such as in enhanced oil recovery. And there must be some way to incentivize industry to do this so that they're not absorbing the entire cost. Um, and,
Mhm.
and I feel like that conversation hasn't happened where it's like, we'll only get maybe the government will provide some incentive, but it won't be for enhanced oil recovery. It's only for storage. And then there's questions on what that looks like, how much that will be, what percentage the industry will have to absorb themselves, or can they pass that on to consumers and so on. I don't want to get into the weeds so much, but it's interesting that the women are saying, well, there is a solution there. Why aren't we talking about an appropriate solution?
Well, and I think, and yeah, if I tried to go into the weeds of the technology, that would not be a good thing. Um, but I think the point is that women are willing to make more trade-offs and compromises. And what happens is, and this is part of why we do what we do and why we use research, is because assumptions are made about women's perspectives. And what women actually think is often counterintuitive to the narratives that are out there. So, and the other part of, the emissions cap piece that we did for the Calgary Herald was just the idea that, like, we need to be somewhat pragmatic and realistic about pace and costs and what gets passed on to consumers,
Yeah.
and sort of the realistic realism of a pragmatic energy transformation. And when you look at what's currently happening, is this discussion about tariffs and getting our product to a diversified customer base, the opportunity with liquid natural gas. And I think being realistic about what we can do, um, and still grow our economy and have a robust future is important. The other thing our research tells us explicitly is engaged women do support fossil fuels as part of the energy mix now and in the future. So when you go across Canada, women will really speak to the energy sources of their region. So if you ask somebody in Ontario, they're going to talk about nuclear and hydro and electrification. And by the way, they have the highest level of acceptance of nuclear in the country, which is not
Yeah.
surprising because that's their main energy source. But when you go across all the provinces and you ask the question about what do you see in the energy mix, it's well above 65% around naming natural gas as part of the energy mix. So if you look at policy and what policy, energy and climate policy, are doing, what we're trying to do is be a sound energy kind of voice around what we really think, and some very thoughtful, balanced perspectives that women have around all of this. And we feel that women are generally underrepresented in this conversation, or possibly misrepresented, because we know as well that women are concerned about expressing their true opinions on these subjects because they are so polarized and they get canceled or told that you're this or that. And it's actually just very thoughtful consideration for all of these topics and how it affects the daily life, the me, and the bigger, more macro perspective, which is the we.
That's interesting because in my experience, women will kind of see how the conversation is going, and don't and women for the most part tend to be agreeable and don't want to have the fight and the confrontation and so on. So I
Yeah.
can totally see how women might feel like their views are being misrepresented because the loud one, the loud person will go out there and make their statement, and then they feel like women feel like they can't necessarily engage in that conversation because then it will create a fight. And yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, we did focus groups across the country. We had women from every corner of Canada, and I listened to all of them. And it was like 18 hours of focus groups over a couple of days. And I remember this woman telling a story. She was in a more rural community in Ontario, southern Ontario, and she talked about a conversation in the lunchroom. And she expressed her perspective, and nobody agreed with her. And then nobody would sit with her anymore. And
Wow.
she's like, I'm never going to say anything ever again about what I think. And I was like, sad for her because I'm
Yeah.
like, really? Is that how we've gotten to? So I also have heard women talk very explicitly about energy affordability and that everybody puts on their sweaters, the heat gets turned down, like conservation around using heating in the home. So women are very astutely aware of the heightened sensitivities around these conversations, but they're starting to really, I see a tide sort of shifting, and I really see it in our research. And I think voting intentions and how policy does or does not resonate with engaged women's priorities will definitely play out in election cycles.
Yes, that's a very interesting development, especially with respect to affordability. Women, I think, feel it the most if you can't turn the dishwasher on, you gotta wait or the laundry has to wait or
Laundry.
whatever, you know? And, every day I complain about my children leaving piles and piles of laundry, but on the other hand, I'm grateful that I don't have to sit there and do it by hand. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's a machine. How hard is it to load a machine? But if you're worried about energy and if there's like where I live in the UK, sometimes there's brownouts. And so it's like, do I risk taking, putting something in that it's going to get interrupted or any of those kinds of things? So when you're talking to women, do you hear any solutions? Like, are there any solutions put forward there?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things that I've spoken to is that women are looking to technology and innovation, and they understand that things have to be developed, and it's a big part of the piece of the puzzle as far as emissions reduction. The other thing is they also are supportive of export, and they see export as a solution to lower emissions and also to drive revenue for the country. And so that might seem extremely timely given the conversations that are going on in Canada right now. But we asked that question a year ago. And so this isn't a new thought process or conversation for engaged women. It's something they look to. We should be exporting. We should be getting revenue for our energy. We should be reducing emissions through technology and innovation, not through stopping production. Um, so I feel like those are some pretty meaty things that women look to.
That's a really good point, and I wonder if that didn't come a little bit out of what happened when Russia attacked Ukraine and Canada was being asked to help out its allies, and we said no, you know. And I think a lot of people, including women, were like, "Why can't we help? Why can't we help Europe?" "Oh, because we don't have the pipelines and because we can't do this and can't do that." And it's not just that it would help our allies from an energy security perspective and increase our revenue, but it lowers emissions not just in the technology and innovation, but in displacing other more polluting forms of energy, such as coal. So, but if we're an unreliable supplier, why on earth would anyone want to swap from coal to LNG, for example? I think of the case of Pakistan, where they were committing to building new natural gas power plants, and then when the war hit, Europe just basically interrupted all of their natural gas contracts and took the natural gas. So then now Pakistan is like, well, we're going to go back to coal because we can't trust that we'll get the supply um, on an unstable world market like that. But Canada could have been helping Europe, and then Europe wouldn't have needed to take the Pakistani natural gas and break those contracts. So what Canada did actually increased emissions elsewhere in the world, one could argue.
For sure. I mean, we're very, very careful and thoughtful uh, that we don't get into any geopolitical type discussion or line of questioning when we do our research. And so I can't really say, that women think this because of this specifically, um, because everyone has their own experiences as to why they perceive something in a certain way. But what we do know with our engaged women is they're really like they are into the news. They consume news of all different forms, both Canadian news and American news. And so they're getting a lot of information. They're also all over the internet. So they are looking at everything, reading everything, but they don't participate, meaning they don't comment, they don't get into political or environmental discussion or energy discussion online, but they're taking it all in. So I can only imagine what kinds of things would fuel their thinking. I think the other point I would also share is that, um, on the topic of affordability, our big questions and surveys around affordability and financial hardships actually were asked before the last carbon tax increase. So I can only
Okay.
imagine what some of those affordability issues are like now, because we asked all our questions in May and the carbon tax increase, or excuse me, in March, and the carbon tax increased in April. And so again, so I wouldn't attribute affordability just to the timing of the carbon tax increase. It's like what's happening in your life.
Right. For sure. I can see that, especially when a person goes to get groceries and or they see what their heating bill is if the winter happens to be quite cold, or what the electricity bill is and so on. That makes a lot of sense. So, what is the view of engaged women on um, Canada's record with the environment with respect to, do they view the Canadian industry as doing a good job with respect to the environment? Is that one of the questions?
We haven't asked about historical environmental perspective, and we haven't asked for views around that piece. And I don't think it's a question I'm going to pursue with our
Okay,
research. And the reason for that is I have to be really careful and thoughtful around C59. And it's hard
right.
to ask questions around environmental performance without possibly being perceived as making claims. So I have not been in that realm for a while now.
Okay, okay. I was just kind of wondering if they've
Yeah.
spoken at all about balancing the care for environment, like ensuring clean water and so on. But okay, no problem.
Yeah, I think the fact, I was just going to say, I think the fact that for the last 2.5 years, women have had emissions reduction as their number one or their number three priority speaks to how important the environment is to women. But I think when you also look at, though, the trade-offs that women are willing to make to continue to have a sustained standard of living, um, that I think that does speak to the recognition that you can have all of it. You don't have to have one or the other, and it can be balanced. The
Right.
perceptions that
Yeah.
women have too around the energy sector and oil and gas, particularly its contribution to the economy, are extraordinarily high, like in the 90+%.
Wow. Wow. I think, yeah, that's amazing that the numbers are so high with respect to that. It seems a bit like a no-brainer, but to have that confirmed with the polling data is incredible. That's really
Well,
great.
that's why we use polling, because if I said that, and if I said, you know what, there's a lot of alignment with women across the country, and I didn't have the data to back that up, then it would really be a struggle to have a conversation that's grounded in the facts, like, and the truth. It's like, no, there is. So, for example, if it's on average 78% of engaged women support the export of liquid natural gas. Well, that number is like something like 87% for women in Alberta and 83% for women in Ontario.
Wow. Wow. Because normally you wouldn't hear that, right? You would say, "Well, is that data skewed? Is it just coming from oil producing regions?" But when you look at, if, as you say, the engaged women are doing their research, they're looking at what the different impacts are, how we ought to be prioritizing things. So in some ways, for people who do their own research, that's not surprising. Um, yeah, so
But
that's
it's
great.
just it's just counterintuitive. Like, you wouldn't think that that's where it is, but that's we see a lot of common ground, way more common ground than not.
So I know we're running out of time here. Is there any sort of last minute things you'd like to say to the listeners or the viewers here about how this conversation can go forward? If there's a new liberal leader, or does that change anything? Will the how will the conversation improve over time?
So for us, it really doesn't matter who is in charge. So our like what we do is we take what women tell us, we amplify that, we take it to policymakers, we take it to media, speaking opportunities, and we try to grow our membership, which, by the way, is free. You just go to our website, join the community. You will get in our groove of our biweekly, our bi-monthly newsletter. And we are trying to share these insights and get this in front of policymakers. So one, they'll take into consideration what engaged women think, and when they're evaluating policy or building policy, like, we're happy to be like, here's the data, and be part of that discussion so women are actually represented when policy decisions are being made.
That's excellent. I'm so happy you're doing this and getting the data to try and understand and just speak to other women in the country, so that engaged women do have a voice and aren't just kind of clumped into whatever stereotypical groups uh, politicians want to stick us in. Um, so thank you so much, Tracy, for your time today, for sharing with us your latest data and explain what it is that your group does. I subscribe to your newsletter. It's fantastic, and I
Thank
encourage
you.
other women out there to do so too. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.